Hello, welcome to the Self-Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start Unit 4, Theoretical Analysis. In Unit 3, we discussed that the theories differ according to the basic or major premises on which they are based. The premises are given conditions or universal truths that we take for granted when we formulate a research problem or look for some explanations of a social phenomena. Continuing with our general discussion of the approaches to understanding social reality, in Unit 4 we are going to wind up our narrative by talking about the growth of theoretical analysis in the social sciences in general and in sociology in particular. We will begin the story with the evolutionary theory and move on to functional and structural functional approaches. After a short critique of evolutionary and functional theories, we will discuss the phase of postmodernism with regard to the crisis of representation in the disciplines of sociology and anthropology. During the nervous 80s and 90s of the 20th century, American and continental social sciences included intensive reflection on the link between the authorship and authority, and focused on subjectivity and reflexibility while abandoning the empirical approach. Almost in a racing style, the narrative in Unit 4 gives us an opportunity to become fleetingly familiar with the names of the post-modern scholars and their ideas. At the end, we will briefly note the current status of the methodological engagements of sociology in India. Now let us move to the point premises of evolutionary and functional theories. In the 19th century, with the acceptance of the fact that the human is a unified species, the problem of variation of human social institutions and cultures was explained by converting a spatial difference into a temporal one. In other words, different societies were different because they were seen to be in different stages in the ladder of evolution. This was the evolutionary theory based upon the basic assumption of progress and a stage-by-stage evolution of human society, where society was seen as one unified reality of human existence. Culture was spelled with a capital C and was common to all humanity and not cultures that vary across time and space. From this point of view, all societies are the same. The difference that we observe is only a chance factor of some societies being arrested in development and others more progressive. Some societies are past of the others and some are the future of all. Because of this inbuilt idea of progress, the term primitive society came into being. Those termed primitive were literally considered to be the past of those termed modern. The study of other cultures was the study of looking into one's past. The evolutionary theory was built upon the premise that we can explain the occurrence of some social phenomena by reference to the past of human society. The assumption was that this past can be discovered in societies physically in the present, but culturally arrested at some previous time period. The term our primitive contemporaries was used for the purpose of describing culturally arrested types. This trend was followed by the functional theory that was derived from the 18th century positivism and organic analogy. The basic premises of this theory were not in the transformation and understanding of human society and culture as unified, but were rooted in relativism and interdependence. It was believed that cultures are multiple and each is unique unto itself. The questions that were asked were not about origin and progress, but about the contribution and function of each trait to the functioning of the whole. The whole here was a living society and culture to be studied only in present, with no allusion to the past or future. In the functional approach to understand the social reality, we have to static theory. A static explanation is one where a social variable is explained only in terms of variables belonging to the same period. This kind of theory is not based on a premise that the phenomena in question is actually ahistorical, but on the assumption that a sufficient understanding of it is possible by recourse to data that are situational. The type of questions that the functional theory would address would be different from those addressed by evolutionists, who professed a theory of human society progressing from stage A to stage B in a scale of evolution. Usually, functionalists have explained what function is being performed by a particular trait in a particular culture at a particular period of time. In the evolutionary theory, on the other hand, at least some of the variables used in the explanation belonged to a time period prior to the time then the variables to be explained. In this sense, evolutionary theory was used to explain origins and development or transformations and social change. From Durkheim to Talcott Parson, functionalism, with its roots in early French philosophers like Comte, had a long grip over sociological theory. It served the needs of the hour and was compatible with the organic analogy that was often drawn for society and culture by social philosophers, sociologists, and anthropologists. Now let us move to the next point, critique of evolutionary and functional theories. Quite often, as an adjunct of historical conditions, the accepted premises of a discipline have been challenged time and again with changes in the philosophies of the times. For instance, the concept of primitive was challenged and replaced by the concept of cultural relativism. Admirable as the concept of cultural revitalism was in according validity and status to all cultures, many scholars attacked the implicit assumption underlying this concept that one should maintain the status quo in the name of relativism. If every culture is demonstrated to be a functioning whole, then the implication is that all cultures should be left alone. Many scholars criticized this point of view on the grounds that such a policy would perpetuate inequalities and differential power equations that exist in the world. Every group of people has a right to change and improve its living conditions and harbor aspirations for a better life. This is especially true in situations of traditional inequalities and marginalization. For example, would one make a case to preserve the institution of untouchability on the ground that it leads to a stable and functioning system? The entire concept of functionality and harmony were questioned on methodological grounds of teleology for the meaning of this term and on ethical ground of social injustice. We can also clearly make out that functionality does not guarantee justice. For example, even slavery may have been a functional system in that it was productive and it worked, but to call it just would be stretching things too far. It became quite obvious that to assume a static view of society like the functional theorists did had far-reaching implications in terms of social policy. The debate ensued as to what approach the administration should take with respect to the so-called marginal people under its jurisdiction. Many were opposed to the preservation approach and many others to the assimilation approach. The question was also raised as to whether the concept of cultural relativism was a descriptive hypothesis or a value theory. As a hypothesis, it states that no value judgments are objectively justifiable, independent of specific cultures. But this does not rule out the possibility that some values may be common to all cultures. In this sense, it makes social scientists to state facts and not to make value judgment about cultures. Most sociologists and anthropologists are careful in stating their data in terms of facts, what is and not in terms of what ought to be. This practice often raises the moral questions whether a scholar remains just a scholar when he or she comes across practices that are heinous, like female infanticide. Some may advocate a separation of roles as scientist and as scholar, and others may incorporate the role of activism within that of the scientist. Such questions continue to always haunt the scholar in the field. As human beings study human societies, the gap between theory and practice is quite often fraught with tension. In the late 20th century, critical theory largely replaced value-neutral theories as more and more scholars engaged in issues like human rights and social justice. This is not to say that such were not also the concerns of earlier social thinkers. For example, the social basis of theory in the thought of Marx and others included concerns of social justice. Theory in the social sciences has continuously reflected changing social conditions. In the early 20th century, the concept of change became a major theoretical and ethical issue as it was realized that change was an essential dimension of our lives. The two world wars, the independence of colonies, rapid industrialization, and capitalist expansion all had immense effects on sociological theory. Not only change but also conflict became a central concept in the social sciences, and it became increasingly debated as to what was a more neutral human condition, harmony or conflict. Critics like David Lockwood complained that it gave a fictionalized view of the world. Another kind of criticism emerging was about the nature of science and reality itself. It claimed that any claim to scientific objectivity is itself a constructed phenomena, and such constructs invariably serve the power interest of some. The works of Foucault and Gramsci were much influential in these lines. Both Foucault and Gramsci elaborated on themes of one's own domination by more powerful others. Now let us wind up the session and take rest. Thank you very much for engaging yourself with the self-learning podcast.